All right. So hello, everyone. My name is Ben Conroy, and I'm here with my co-editor, Will Zimmerman, and we're here with Athletic Director John Currie to ask him a couple questions about the recent hiring of Coach Steve Forbes for the men's basketball program. So, Will, if you want to kick us off with some questions.
Sure. So these are obviously unprecedented times, and I'm sure that the process has changed. So during normal times, what would the process be for hiring a new coach, and how has that been affected by quarantine and the global health crisis?
Sure. Thanks, Will. Well, our first priority is always the health and safety of our student athletes, our students, our staff, et cetera. So, this whole process from the end of the season until May 1st, when we introduced Coach Forbes as our new head basketball coach at Wake Forest, has certainly been affected in lots of different ways. Candidly, there are some elements of having to do a search under the COVID-19 environment. There were some elements that were kind of helpful. The fact that we had social distancing and all that kind of stuff. And then again, there were some things that made it much more difficult. So certainly the fact that we did most of our meetings and group interviews and all that kind of stuff on a Zoom platform, was different than what I have done in the past. This was the 10th head coaching search that I've led as an athletics director. Probably was involved in 3 or 4 as an associate AD before. So I've never done one quite like this. I've never done one where I didn't get on an airplane at least once, and I didn't get on any airplanes. I did make 2 car trips, but they were relatively short car trips. I didn't earn any hotel points, none of that. And so in a lot of ways, it was helpful. It was also it would have been unusual. Usually, when I've had a coaching transition, I've left town because if I'm in town and around, then people know I'm there, and maybe they're, well, what's he doing? Why is he not working on our search? Or people are able to talk about that. So I usually leave town and go somewhere. In this particular case, there wasn't any reason to leave town because I could go to the office and no one's around. Campus is empty, and nobody's really tracking everything like that. So the other element about this search that was different, not necessarily because of COVID-19, but this particular hire is so important for Wake Forest, and there's so many people that have either real investment or emotional investment in Wake Forest basketball and men's basketball at Wake Forest and what it's meant to us historically. And as you guys know from being on the Wake Forest campus, we're a little bit different than some. I mean, we're definitely more. If you take Power 5 institutions, we would have to be, one of the more interpersonally driven institutions in the country. And that's one of our advantages, right? We're different than other folks because we do have a crucible, if you will, that gives the opportunity to develop stronger relationships. And as a result, it's important when you bring someone into our campus community that's going to have such an important role for people inside the campus community to feel like they were represented one way or another in the selection process or the evaluation process for that particular candidate. So in this case, as I talked about at our press conference on Friday, beginning Saturday night, last Saturday, obviously we had the press conference earlier that day about our transition. Beginning Saturday night, we had an incredible group of university leaders that came together to review and evaluate the candidates that we put before them, and then discuss an interview process that was really unlike most interview processes at this level in terms of the inclusion of high-level academic leaders in the process. So with Provost Kirsch and Dean Gillespie and Dr. Brubaker, who's our faculty athletics rep, and Dean Walton, who is the Dean of our Divinity School and also a member of the presidential cabinet, and then Lindsay Babcock and the athletic staff, and Pete Poxtelis. We spent about 2 hours together on Sunday night, and then we started those Zoom interviews with candidates on Sunday and continued into Monday. And so in a normal time, back to the question that you asked like 45 minutes ago, Will, that I haven't answered yet. In a normal time, you would have said, well, we need to get that group together, and so let's all get to the Chicago Hilton, or let's go to the Grand Hyatt, the Grand Hyatt at DFW Airport, or let's go to the Westin in Denver and have airport interviews and have all these people be there. And that was totally impractical in this moment in time. But because we didn't have to think about whether we can get all these people to a particular place, boom, we could do it on Zoom, and it was very effective and very helpful. So that's kind of a good look at your question.
So kind of going off of that, as you're honing in on the search and you're doing the interview process, what about Steve Forbes made do you feel that he's the right guy for the job? And did your time working together in the past at Tennessee play any role in the decision?
We had a great number of candidates who were very interested in our job. We couldn't interview them all, but we had excellent candidates, excellent coaches, lots of different levels around the country who had an immediate interest in the opening at Wake Forest because of all the advantages that you guys know. I mean, we have spectacular facilities, but we also have the most beautiful campus in America. We've got this great city of Winston-Salem that's got all these things going for it. We're in a state with a lot of basketball players, and we're in a state with a good school system. So you have student athletes coming out of our high school ranks in the state of North Carolina who can do the academic work at Wake Forest. So all those attributes make this a very, very attractive job being in the ACC, you name it. So we knew, and I said in the press conference last Saturday, so a week ago, 9 days ago, I said one of the hardest things would be narrowing down that field. And so if you look at all of our candidates, we needed people, we needed energy, we needed recruiting and relationship building plan and evidence of a plan, not just I have a plan, but evidence of how they've executed a plan and showing adaptability. We needed, high intelligence organization, all those kind of things. Obviously, we had to have a person of character, and we had to have somebody that believed in in what we do at Wake Forest and believe that college athletics intrinsically is within the construct of higher education. And so Coach Forbes fit all those measures, and he's a hell of a ball coach, as evidenced by his record, both his 5 years at East Tennessee State as a head coach, but also all those years of coaching community college basketball and winning. Another element of Coach Forbes, I think there was a big differentiator, is the fact that he's made tough transitions before. The fact that he's transitioned into jobs, there's an art and a skill to that, and a level of experience that comes along with that. And him having a staff, a number of coaches that he knew would translate to this level because they've been at this level. So like B.J. Mackey played at South Carolina. He's all-time leading scorer at South Carolina. He's familiar with the Carolinas, which all of our candidates agree that we had to do a better job recruiting and establishing a presence in North Carolina and the Carolinas in general. So Coach Mackey would be a high-level guy that's at East Tennessee State that can transition right into the ACC. Brooks Savage, who was with him, who's also come, was on the staff at Tennessee and is a Tennessee grad and experience at a high level as well. And then so you add all that together, those guys can come in and they don't have to figure out who's going to do what. They know what their responsibilities are coming in the door.
All right. So moving on from that, you kind of touched on this earlier, but Coach Manning was let go on Saturday, and then Coach Forbes accepted his offer just on the following Thursday. So do you care to comment a little bit on how you guys were able to move through that process so quickly?
Well, one of the AD's responsibilities, or any leader's responsibilities, is preparation for transition. And so actually, this was not the fastest men's basketball search I've done. When we hired Coach Weber at Kansas State in 2012, we did that in 100 hours. I think from the time we had the press conference was 100 hours, or press conference to announcement, I should say, was 100 hours. In this particular case, I need to go back and calculate it up, but I think it's 116 hours or 112 hours from the time we had the press conference Saturday until the time we made the announcement shortly after 1 o'clock on Thursday. When we go through a process like this, well, let me back up. Our first goal, we got 5 core goals at Wake Forest, and our first goal is to offer a world-class student-athlete experience. And student athletes are at the center of everything we do. We can easily be distracted by that, but it comes down to we've got a handful of student athletes who, during the coaching transition, are in an extraordinarily uncertain time. And it is my responsibility as athletics director to reduce that time of uncertainty in as much reason as I can for those student athletes. And for our program and enable us to get, moving forward. So that's always a focus. So I did not know on the outset when I stood before you on Zoom last Saturday that we were going to hire Steve Forbes, but I certainly knew who Steve Forbes was, and I certainly knew who other coaches were that may or may not fit Wake Forest. There were some coaches, extraordinary coaches, as I mentioned, who were interested in the job, but that Saturday night, they just didn't make the cut list as we sought to narrow it down.
All right. So you also touched on this earlier. Coach Forbes has obviously had a very impressive track record during his time at ETSU and his time at Tennessee and Wichita State and other programs like that. So they've played a lot of postseason basketball. What do you attribute his sustained success to, and how do you see it carrying over as he takes the helm of Wake's program?
Well, first and foremost, Coach Forbes has been committed to education his whole life. He's a first-generation college student, and if you look at what that's translated into from an athletic scholarship at Southern Arkansas University, I think is the name of it, from an athletic scholarship there, the transformation resulting from that is, his daughter Elizabeth is finishing her PhD. Their son Christopher is finishing his master's degree. His wife Janetta, to whom he has been married for 32 years, is a 32-year elementary school teacher. So there's a real commitment to education and understanding the value of education there. And so that's one of the things I think that's made him successful throughout his career. But then he's also been a great learner. And you think about the people he's been around. I believe in his press conference, some of it's running together. He talked about the way they transformed and changed their offense this year at East Tennessee State, having the courage to take something that was pretty good. I think, what did they win, 24, 25 games the year before? And this year they went in and they tinkered with it and they broke it down. Nick Nurse is a really close friend of his, who's the head coach of the Toronto Raptors. And they broke it down, and they had the courage to make those changes and tune that thing up. And so instead they won 30 games this year, having that adaptability and the ability to take the personnel, look at how they maximize their student athletes' opportunities is very, very impressive about Steve Forbes.
So obviously he's a great coach. He's won a lot of games over the past 5 seasons, especially at ETSU. And during that time, I think that there's been a really positive influence on the role of basketball at ETSU in general. So over the last 14 years, Wake had the lowest attendance they've ever had over the past 14 years this past season. And what do you think Forbes will bring to this program that will allow for more fan interest in the games?
I'd love to turn around and ask you guys, but what I would say, you're asking me the question, so I don't want to not be responsive to your question. Number one, he's bringing energy, and he's bringing a proven ability. Number two, to build relationships. Steve Forbes is a guy that loves to be around people, and one of his challenges, I'm gonna have to do a good job of making sure he maintains his focus. I'm not worried about that, but he's a guy that says he won't say no and all that kind of stuff. And so he will be very visible, very present. I think our students have already responded. I've tried to stay off Twitter since the change, but I understand that from Twitter and Instagram and all that kind of stuff, our students have been highly engaged with him. He engages on Twitter himself, late at night. He's been a pretty significant participant in the social media realm. I'd also say that at East Tennessee State, I think he used it. He talked about East Tennessee State being a really proud program that had been through a tough time, just a time of kind of malaise. And we're kind of the same way at Wake Forest. I mean, we have incredible success. It's not pockets of success. It's sustained periods of success, bordered by pockets of frustration. And certainly the last 10 years has been a big pocket of frustration. And so he had to do the same thing going into reinvigorating East Tennessee State. I can't remember the statistic, but I think they've drawn 160,000 people more in this 5 years than they did the previous 5 years. So I know that that'll be a big point of emphasis for him. And it's been awesome to see the energy already from our fans in that regard. College basketball is about students, and it's about the student athletes. And we saw it this year, didn't we? We saw it this year when we had the big win over Duke, kind of the energy and the number of students that came up to me and said, that's the best thing that's ever happened, and the fun on the quad. I mean, that's what it's all about. And that's the environment that I experienced when I was a student at Wake Forest. And then the 6 years I worked here at Wake Forest in the 90s. And I want all our students I want you to have that. I want students to have that experience when they come to Wake Forest. At the same time, it's a symbiotic relationship. You're going to get out of it as students what you put into it. And if students choose to be part of the solution, knowing that, it's going to be a challenging year this coming year, right? But if students will get there and be part of it, that's going to help him from a recruiting standpoint. It's going to help our athletes currently feel good about the effort they're putting into the thing. And then as we build it, it's going to be a lot more fun for students at the end when we're playing meaningful games as March, as Coach Forbes likes to say, it's going to be a lot more fun for students to say, I've been at every game since the 1st of November. I've done my part too to help get this thing where it needs to be.
That's great. So you talked a little bit about Duke, and we had obviously an awesome game and a great win. But overall, over the past couple of years, Wake has not fared very well in the ACC. So what do you think Mr. Forbes will bring to the table in terms of allowing us to compete in what's arguably the most strong conference in the country?
Yeah, it's the best conference in the country. It's got the most sustained success and notoriety in the country, and great coaches. I mean, look at all the teams and look at all these programs in our league that have won the national championship. I mean, you got Syracuse, Virginia, Duke, North Carolina State. You go on down the list of programs. Georgia Tech's been in the Final Four. You go up. I'm leaving somebody out, I know. So there's some incredible sustained success and history in our league, and that's attractive to coaches because it helps them recruit the best players and all that kind of stuff. But there's no question in my mind that he's going to build us back into a competitor, and the way he evaluates, the way he recruits, the way he builds culture within his program. I loved what he talked about last week in the press conference about this being a players program. The program belongs to the players. The coaches are stewards, but the program belongs to the players, and building that sense of player ownership. I think all of those things are reasons we're going to be back in a contention manner. The other thing I would mention is that Wake Forest is different because we're in the city of Winston-Salem. There's a lot of schools that have basketball tradition, but they don't have a city that's broader than just the school itself. And so we have the benefit of being both a community that loves basketball and has basketball heritage inside the ACC and Tobacco Road and all that kind of stuff. And we have the benefit of the fact that there's Wake Forest is inside the community. So you got people that love basketball, and Wake Forest is my team because it's in town. And then you got people that went to Wake Forest or affiliated with Wake Forest that love basketball. So you bubble all that in, 300,000 people in our little in our city here. That's a huge advantage that even some blue blood programs, they don't have. So I love the idea of seeing the Joel Pact again with people that have been brought together from outside, just off the Ronaldo campus, but throughout the city, throughout the community. And when we talk about bringing value to Wake Forest, bringing value to the Winston-Salem community, bringing value to the Triad and beyond, that's one of the responsibilities that athletics has to connect the university to its surrounding community, and we take that very seriously.
That's a great point. So there have been several Wake players that have recently entered the transfer portal: Oliver Sarr, Jacoby Neath, Ismail Massoud, among a few. In light of everything that's happened, do you see these players potentially choosing to return to Wake, and what role, if any, will Coach Forbes play in returning this talent?
Well, I think it depends on lots of things, but certainly I thought Coach Forbes' comments about complimenting Coach Manning Friday in terms of who he brought to Wake Forest. I mean, all those men that you just mentioned, I think very highly of. I had a chance to speak. I spoke to every player last Saturday, Sunday, Monday at length about what they wanted to see in their new coach. And I believe we've delivered a coach that meets a lot of those criteria. And I know he'll be working very hard as his first priority, to re-recruit those players, so to speak. As I mentioned earlier, this is a time of anxiety and uncertainty, and those players absolutely should take the time to assess the situation versus what other options that they may have. At the end of the day, I like what Coach Forbes says. We got the triple-double right here in Winston-Salem, right? We got a top 30 university. We got incredible facilities. We got a fan base. We're going to win here. And so I want all those student athletes to come back and be a part of earning a Wake Forest degree, which lasts a lifetime, and being part of a rebuilt championship tradition.
Okay, great. So to continue off of that, there's kind of a tendency for some players to hesitate to commit to play under a first-year coach. So what qualities about Forbes do you think will allow him to overcome this barrier and kind of gain the respect and the trust of the team?
Well, all you have to do is you look at the record and then look at the accolades. And so if you look at what he did taking over East Tennessee State, our program, we won 13 games this year. We won 11 games last year. And we were very close, and we were much improved, I think. But, if you look at what he did taking over that East Tennessee State team and turning it into a contender right away, I think that would be very encouraging to me and y'all, and certainly to our players as well. But then if you look at the testaments from around the country, that every single basketball writer in the country has praised Coach Forbes and been very positive about this hire. You got Nick Nurse, you got former players, you got a bunch of former players. Actually, a list on our website with East Tennessee State players, Wichita State players. I saw a text from my buddy Dane Bradshaw the other day, just one after another, praising the kind of man, the kind of person, the kind of coach Steve Forbes is for our program.
I think a lot of people would agree that it's a great hire, but it takes more than just a head coach to really produce a sustained success over time. So has he talked about any other staff that he's going to bring in, or are things going to remain largely in the same format that they were under head coach Manning?
Sure. Well, it's always up to the coach. I mean, one of the differences between college athletics and professional athletics is, in pro athletics, you have a president of the franchise, you got a general manager, and you got a coach. And the general manager is really the person who's in charge of hiring assistant coaches, the draft and the player procurement. And the general manager and the head coach sometimes, are in total alignment. Sometimes, the general manager is just giving it all to the head coach, and the head coach decides. The difference between an AD, the college scene, the AD is not the general manager. The AD is more like the team president. The head coach is the general manager in college. And so it's the head coach's responsibility. It's Dave Claus's responsibility to hire the assistants for a football program, and it's his responsibility to recruit the players. Obviously, I have a responsibility to ensure that we're recruiting good people and hiring good people, but that's a delegated responsibility to our head coaches. And if they don't do that, that's a different kind of problem, right? So it's really up to Coach Forbes, just like it was up to Coach Glosson when he came here. It was up to Randy Smart when she became our new volleyball coach last fall. She made some staffing decisions. It's really up to the coach. And so one of the good things about a coach who's been doing it for 30 years and has been a head coach multiple times is they know what their priorities are.
Okay, so one final question here. There have been some conflicting reports that have emerged surrounding the nature of Coach Manning's buyout. The original figure was reported to be $15 million, but there are other reports that say the school is planning to pursue a different course of action. So what comment, if any, do you have on this situation?
Respectfully, I have no comment because Wake Forest, as a practice and as policy, does not comment on personnel matters and personnel agreements.
Okay, yeah, no problem at all. Thank you so much for taking the time, Athletic Director Currie. So let's stop the recording now.